Hello, my name is Cliff Holcomb, and I'm doing my project on improving student memory in the classroom. What initially got me interested in this subject goes back to my 2016-2017 school year. I did my best to follow our district curriculum and pacing guides. I aligned and covered the Ohio content standards to the best of my ability, and my students were doing well for the most part. I would teach a subject, they would learn it, they would do well on the test, but then, as soon as the test was over, it was like they hit an erase button and it was gone. This became very evident to me when we took our MAPS test at the end of the school year. MAPS stands for the Measure of Academic Progress. This is a summative test that the students take 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end. When I looked at the results of how my students did, I was shocked. Some did well like I expected, but a large group of my students really struggled. It was as if everything I taught them was gone. That got me thinking, how could they know something so well in November, February, March, but then only have a vague memory of it in May when it counted? I would later discover that the problem was memory. I was doing a great job at getting the material into my students' short-term memory, but not doing anything to keep it there. That's where long-term memory comes in. So the next question is obvious, right? How do I get information from my students' short-term memory into their long-term memory? The answer I found is something called retrieval practice. Every week I listen to a podcast titled The Cult of Pedagogy by Angela Watson. On September 24th, when I was driving home, she was interviewing a doctor named Dr. Pooja Agarwal, who is a leading expert in this category. Dr. Pooja Agarwal is an expert in the field of cognitive science. She has conducted research on retrieval practice in student learning for more than 10 years and is a leader in helping educators use retrieval practice in their classroom. She defines retrieval practice simply as the act of recalling information without having it in front of you. How can retrieval practices help? Well, the more information a student can retrieve, the better they will do on assessments. What can I do as an educator? Begin implementing retrieval practice strategies into your classroom and curriculum. The 4 retrieval practice strategies that I will be discussing are challenging learning experiences, the testing effect, the spacing effect, and interleaving. Let's begin with number 1, challenging learning experiences. What is easy to learn is easy to forget. What is easy to learn leads to short-term memory. That is why we forget it so fast. Here are a few questions that prove this point. What did you have for dinner last Tuesday? What element does K stand for on the periodic chart? How old was King Tut when he became pharaoh? Do you remember taking an exam, feeling confident that you knew the material, but ended up doing poorly? Have you ever gone to the grocery store for something, but forgot what it was when you got there? Have you ever forgotten where you parked? These are all things that are easy to remember, yet we forget them just as easily. This actually just happened to me last night. My family and I went to an amusement park, and it was incredibly crowded. It took us 45 minutes just to get from the entrance to a parking spot. I was so frazzled and rushed when we got there that I didn't really pay attention to where we parked. I remember looking up at the sign in the parking lot as I was trying to unload my kids and get the stroller out, but I didn't write it down or take a picture because 33E is easy to remember, right? Well, sure enough, I was the guy walking around in the parking lot with my keys in the air, trying to set off my alarms so I could find my car. But why did I forget this? It's easy to remember where I parked, right? This is what's happening in my classroom. This brings me to the first strategy you can begin using in your classroom, challenging learning experiences. Peter Brown is one of the authors of Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. He discusses something called the illusion of mastery. This is the illusion that I know something, so I don't really need to work at studying it. Think back to a big exam you had in high school or college. There were probably some things on the test you thought you had down, and some things you knew you needed to study hard. You may have spent a lot of time studying the hard things and barely any time at all studying the easy material. Now try and remember, did you miss any of the easy stuff? Perhaps you didn't have it down as you thought you did. I'm seeing this in my classroom this year. My students feel they know their math facts. 5 plus 3, 9 plus 7, 6 plus 6. So when I spend time teaching them math strategies to solve these problems, they tune me out because it's easy and they already know it. Sure enough, when test time comes, several of them are missing problems that they have no business getting wrong. This is the illusion of mastery. So, if what's easy to remember is easy to forget, then the opposite must be true. Difficult material is actually more difficult to forget. It's better for long-term learning to be challenged and have to work at something. Now remember my students last year who struggled on the end of the year summative test? We did a Christmas play last year, and I made them memorize all their lines. They moaned, they groaned, they cried, but they did it. And guess what? Whenever I see them in the hallway, they still recite their lines to me. I still remember lines that I had way back in 8th grade when I did a play of Anne Frank's diary. I had to work so hard at learning those lines, and that's why I still remember them. Another book I read for this project is titled How We Learn: The Surprising Truth About When, Where, and Why It Happens by Benedict Carey. He stated the harder we have to work to retrieve a memory, the subsequent spike in retrieval and storage strength. Basically, the harder it is to pull a memory or something we learned, the easier it will be the next time we need to pull it. Dr. Agarwal also stated something similar, but in a little bit simpler terms. She said, just like exercise, learning works the same way. No pain, no gain. Strategy number 2 is called the testing effect. Research has shown that taking tests actually help increase the retention of the material by an average of 10%. So, testing is learning. Now you may say that 10% really isn't that big of a number, but if we're talking about grading, 10% is a full letter grade in many cases. 80 becomes a 90, 75 becomes an 85. To me, this significantly and immediately raised the importance of doing pre-tests with my students. It has become a huge priority in my classroom and instruction. Carey goes on to state, even when students bomb a pretest, the students get an opportunity to see the vocabulary used in the coming lectures and get a sense of what kinds of questions, distinctions, and concepts are important. I recently moved from a house that had a big nice shed to a house that doesn't have one at all. I immediately became a lot more interested and knowledgeable about sheds than I ever wanted to be. Everywhere I drove, I started noticing other people's sheds, their colors, their sizes, their styles. I started asking questions to my friends who did have sheds. I did research online. I visited Lowe's. I visited Home Depot until I finally found the one I wanted. This is a lot like a pretest. Even though they likely don't know a lot about the material, their ears will perk up and they'll pay a little bit more attention to the vocabulary and material because now it's important to them. Now they know what to look for. Spend more time pulling information from your students. I've been guilty of this myself. Before I started testing, I would say, now don't forget this, don't forget that. I've now found that they don't need more review. They need to pull out the concepts themselves. Dr. Agarwal stated, here's what this means for teachers. If we ask students to pull concepts out of their brain rather than continually testing them, students will actually do better on the test. And I have found this to be true. The third strategy is called the spacing effect. This is also known as distributed learning. This is the difference between cramming versus spreading out over time. Cramming for a test leads to short-term memory. Distributed learning leads to long-term memory. Think of it as watering your lawn every day versus watering it once a week. Even if you use the same amount of water, you're going to have two different results. Your grass will be green if you water it every day, but it will probably die if you dump that same amount of water on it in one day. This is where the importance of a spiraled curriculum comes to place. It makes me think of a spiraled staircase. You need to come back around the material throughout the year. The gap between the last time you cover the material and the next time you talk about it help create a challenging learning environment. And remember, the harder we work to retrieve a memory, the easier it will be to pull from next time. Mr. Carey went on to say that nothing in learning comes close in terms of immediate, significant, and reliable improvements than using the spacing effect. As important as this is, don't forget, this is an approach that takes planning on an educator's part, and it's primarily a retention technique. This is where I went wrong with my students last year. I taught something, they learned it, but then I never came back around to it, and they forgot. They went up the staircase and then came back down. Easy up, easy down. I never spiraled back around again, so they forgot. The final strategy I will be talking about is called interleaving. This is also known as varied practice or mixed review. This is the practice of mixing different types of problems on a test. For example, on a math test you might have word problems, multiplication, regrouping, addition, subtraction, division, graphing, measurement, all on the same test. It sounds a lot like a standardized test, doesn't it? Well, this type of work forces students to identify each problem and then match it to the appropriate kind of solution. I think of it as a door with several locks. The students need to identify which lock needs to be opened. Then they need to find the correct key to open it. Then, after they open, they go on to the next lock. This strategy is effective because it can involve the 3 previous strategies as well. It challenges students. It can be used on a test, and it can distribute learning by asking questions on current and previous material covered. Before I wrap this up though, I want to be able to answer this question. What could I start doing tomorrow? How could I actually begin implementing this into my classroom? From what I read and learned during this project, here are some strategies I found that you could start doing immediately. The first is called a brain dump. This is the simple task of getting a piece of paper out and writing everything you know about a topic. Then, return to the text and see what you got wrong. This goes back to the challenging learning experience. Instead of rereading or using flashcards, your brain has to work a little harder to pull out the information. Reading in flashcards can lead to short-term memory, but a brain dump leads to long-term memory. On the right side, you'll see an example of interleaving. This is what I started using for morning work. It's simple, meaningful, and almost requires no effort on my part, but it will have huge rewards in the end. As you can see, there's several different types of questions here, different subjects, and it kind of going back to the last slide, they have to figure out which lock opens the door. Something else you can begin doing tomorrow is a low-stake quiz. I think we kind of shudder at the sound of the word quiz or test, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about testing that your students might not even know that you're doing. And remember, testing is learning. You can easily do this through clickers such as Kahoot or Quizzes, Think, Pair, Share, dry erase boards, exit slips, pencil, paper, pre-test, and don't forget, at the end, to give timely feedback. And last, don't forget your pre-test or low-stakes quizzes should match your post-test. Use similar vocabulary and questions because that's what they have been looking out for. Here are some additional resources, and here are the resources that I used when putting this together. The 2 books, and then the podcast and Dr. Pooja Argawel's website. I would like to conclude just by thanking you for your time, and I hope you learned something that you can begin using in your classroom tomorrow. This has been an eye-opening assignment for me, and one that I'm so thankful for. I'm confident that if I keep using and implementing these strategies in my classroom, my students' scores will improve at the end of the school year. So again, thank you.